Thank you to all of you here in person. And thank you to everybody who is joining us online. We have quite a great group here tonight. I'm just so happy and so delighted and so thrilled that at last we can celebrate my friend, Mary Bain, whose name rhymes with name, his new book. It's been new for a little while now, but we were way late, first with production and then with weather, but we're all here tonight. And we're here to celebrate her great achievement and to learn a little bit about her book. And I'm not going to introduce her because Kate Sudat, who is a docent here at the Birchfield Penny Arts Center, as is Mary, and she, along with me and a number of you, are docents at the Albright Knox Art Gallery, now the AKG Gallery, or thank you. Thank you, Joanne. Museum, who's had a lot more practice saying that out loud than I have. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Mary Kosev, and our little book club started as a docent initiative. We started by reading the books that Charles Birchfield read, but we very quickly shifted to celebrating our area authors, which is very much our mission, to support the authors, artists, dancers, art makers of every kind in Western New York. And tonight we're celebrating Mary's achievement. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate, who will introduce Mary and facilitate tonight's book. So thank you, everybody. And those of you online, I'm sorry you can't join us, but those of you here, please help yourself. We have wine, there is soda and water in the little refrigerator around the corner. There's coffee and some snacks. Please get up anytime and help yourself. It's okay.
Okay. So hi, I'm Kate.
Why is the video stopped?
Pardon me? What is that?
Yeah, so I'm having a little technical issue. right
Okay.
now.
Should I wait or?
So
Go ahead.
just be patient. I'm trying to figure out how to get the camera back.
It's just a video, Kate, so you can.
Oh, I can talk. Oh,
Yeah, you
good.
can.
I like that better. I am actually delighted to be able to be here to introduce Mary's book launch.
Yay, Mary.
Yay, Mary. Mary has always been my go-to whenever I have a science question. I first met Mary when I was at the Albright as a docent there, which I hope still am, and here at the Birchfield. But I was telling Mary, she doesn't really remember this, but my first initiation with Mary was when we had an Albrecht Dürer print. There was a quincentennial for him, and the Albright actually has a print of his, and it's Melancholia 1. And I was looking at it, Mary came up and said, oh, these are the science things in there. And I was like, I had no idea. And she pointed out a magic square, which you probably look it up because it's really fascinating. And that's what got me really not only interested in the science connection with art, but in knowing Mary. And Mary, she always, anytime I had a question about science, I'd go and she'd know the answer. So she's my go-to. Mary is a Buffalonian. She was born in Lockport. And when I was a teacher in Kenmore of science, and also was the district chair of the science department. And she's been a docent at the Albright for a number of years, and also now at the Birchfield. So.
And we're thrilled.
And we're thrilled. Okay, you're thrilled. And I'm thrilled that we get to introduce Mary and her new book.
Thank you, Kate. Before we get started, and if I look away from the screen out here, I have an audience out here and I have an audience online. But before we start talking about my book, I really have to make a couple of comments. As you know, many artists have been interested in weather and putting it onto a canvas or whatever. And our recent Western New York weather has prompted me to make a few observations. First of all, we know Charles Birchfield painted any number of paintings where he had weather or storms or whatever showing up. And then an impressionist by the name of Camille Pissarro created over 100 paintings with snow. So I have a thought for you. The next time Buffalo gets a lake effect storm or a blizzard, or a windstorm, or like this morning, a rainstorm with sleet. Think of it as a motivation for creating art.
Great idea.
I don't know if it's a great idea. Now, to get started on the topic of the evening. So I think, and I think you will agree, science and art are fascinating. They're activities of the mind and ways of thinking that shape and enrich our world. But they're specialized fields of study. And perhaps because of this, they often appear to be unrelated. However, science and art are indeed connected. And where and how this occurs is a fascinating story, and it's the subject of my book. Exploring science and art is a venture of discovery. It looks at science with the eye of an artist. It looks at art with the lens of a science. And as it does this, it comes up with connections. When I finished the book, in the last chapter, I proposed 10 connections that connect science and art.
When did you start getting interested in this? I mean, it's interesting to me that a science teacher would all of a sudden become interested in art. I mean, how did you even make that connection?
Well, I always liked science. As a student, I especially liked the labs. People that do lab work think it might just pour things together and stand back and watch. Well, you don't do that if you want to keep on doing it for any length of time. But I liked art, I liked science when I was in school. When I came to college, and I went to Buffalo State as an undergraduate, I took a class in my sophomore year on Western European culture. And the instructor talked a lot about places in Europe where I could go, where I could travel and see art. Places like London and Paris and all the sites in Italy. And I sort of got hooked on watching art. And then I like to travel. When I travel, I like to go to museums. And eventually I decided I didn't know a whole lot about art. Saw something in the paper about a docent in Albright, Max. And I said, can anyone come to this class? And they said, yes. And so I said, by the way, what's a docent? When I took the class, it was a long time ago. You had to pass a test. And I was a test taker, and I passed the test, so I became a docent, and the rest is history.
No science.
Pardon me?
I made a joke, no science, not.
Yeah.
No, science, right? So what made you decide to write a book?
Oh, a lot of things. When I would share the fact that I was interested in science and interested in art, people would say, well, you know, why don't you explain this to me? And I don't know, I thought about it for a while. I even thought, well, maybe I could put together a class where I would teach the connections, and I just never had the time. And then after I retired, I started doing a little more traveling, and I didn't get around to it. And then about 18, 19 years ago, I started to say, well, maybe I should start working on this. And gradually it evolved. It changed over the years.
I know, it's funny. I was a history major, so I always connected it with history. But with science, no, I never really connected it with science. I don't think most people do. Was there ever an aha moment, like, that, or did you just move into it?
I think I always knew about the physics about the color of the light. I think I always knew about that. But I think a big aha moment was that the materials of art were actually chemicals, and that the reason that they work is because of their properties. Sometimes they're physical changes, sometimes they're chemical changes. And that was kind of a surprise. I really never thought about that.
Why do you think people should care about it?
Well, I think people should hear about it because I have to look at my answers. That the connections provide a view. They give you a perspective, a fresh perspective that science alone and art alone cannot do. When you look at something and you can see that for example, you look at a landscape and there's some clouds, and then you look at them, and then if you know a little bit about science, you can say, well, maybe it looks like there's a storm coming or lightning, or you look at some plants that are in the foreground and maybe you can identify them, or you can see connections between the plants and animals that are there. But it's a unique view, and I think that it gives you a fresh perspective. I think it also provides you with a degree of sophistication. Downstairs, there's an exhibition in the Virtual Penny of printmaking techniques. And I think if you know some of the words, some of the different techniques of printmaking, it gives you a little depth when you look at it.
You know, it's interesting. I know when I first became a docent at the Birchfield, I didn't know anything about insects or flowers or any of that. And so it's in learning. You learn so much more and things are much richer if you know a lot more. Can teachers use this book?
Absolutely. It's not a textbook, but it's a book that could be used with an art course. It could be used with science courses. It could be used with STEAM programs, which combine science, technology, engineering, art, and math programs. Could be used at college levels. It could be used in continuing education. It could be used in high schools. And then to facilitate this, I prepared a teacher's guide, which is available free on the internet from the publisher of my book. And the publisher of my book is City of Light Press Publishing.
I also want to add, while you may not call it a textbook, I found it really excellent as a reference. I think every docent should have it because there are so many things in works that we have to show that I didn't even know a lot of the science that was connected to it, or even the technicalities of color, it's really helpful, very helpful to me. So I think it should be a handbook for maybe not a textbook, but a handbook reference.
I'll make the next docent class purchase one
Go ahead.
for sale downstairs in our own
And this is free.
museum store.
This cover doesn't come with it, but,
Right.
and you have to print it yourself, but it's free.
Well, then you have to, it's hands-on. It's like a lab, right?
Also,
And what do you want readers to take away from this book?
well, the obvious that science and art are connected. And that once you start looking for connections, you're going to find them. The more you look, the more you're going to see. Just last week, I heard that somebody, or a group of people, I think they were medical people, have written a play, a musical, would you believe, on penicillin. I'm not doing anything with music in my book, but it's one of the arts. And who would ever think that you would use penicillin as a topic for a musical?
That's cool.
And then the third thing is that I would like people that read the book, especially people that are not in the sciences or the arts, that science and art really are interesting subjects, especially if they weren't your favorite subjects when you were in school. And we could spend a whole lot of time talking about why you might not have liked or why it wasn't your either one of them were your favorite subjects. But there's a lot to discuss in that one.
When you look at the cover of this book, can you see this, people online? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, if you've got a copy of the work, take a look at it. You'll notice that there are 5 circles. And when you first look at that, if you look quickly, you might say that's the Olympic symbol. However, the circles are not interlocking. And then there's something in the center of it. And then if you look a little more carefully, these are actually petri dishes that are growing agar, or growing bacteria on agar, but not just any image of bacteria growing. These are images that were put on the agar to resemble a painting that's in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, one by Vincent van Gogh called The Starry Night. And this images for this were created by a microbiologist by the name of Melanie Sullivan. And she entered a contest, and actually she didn't win the contest, but her entry appeared on the internet, and whoever designed the cover of my book saw this and said, "Well, that's a good cover. It's a connection between
Art.
biology and
Yeah.
and I like the cover too." The cover that I had originally planned myself was another painting by Vincent van Gogh, and would you believe it was also called Starry Night, only this one was Starry Night over the Rhone, and it's in the d'Orsay in Paris.
Mhm.
And the image that the painting has is the Big Dipper and other constellations, and then reflections in the water. It's near a site where Van Gogh lived when he was living in France.
I also want to say, I love the way it's organized. Mary has it down into 5 different categories of, and one is like, it's about, how the bit about the connection between art and science. And then she's got materials and techniques. So you get a lot of scientific information as well as art. And then she's got related phenomena, which has to do with, all light and color. And you just learn so much about art just from reading this book. It's not like a technical, it's very, very easily readable. And do you want to talk a little bit about the categories, the connections? Like in the, how you divided that?
The first section is, I called it what else but about science and art. And I start out with the work of Einstein, Picasso, and Leonardo da Vinci, and then a couple of the other scientists. And then there's a section on, which I thought was appropriate, the nature of science. If you're going to talk about science, you've got to explain what is it. You're going to talk about art, there's a section on the nature of art. And then because we're living in a time when there's a lot of art that's being generated by the current artists, I thought it was appropriate to talk about contemporary science and contemporary art and compare them. And then a section on materials and techniques. And get a little science teachery in the first part because I talk about chemistry and physics. And then I get into the specifics of paint and painting sculpture, glass and ceramics, printmaking and drawing, and then finally architecture. And then I have a section on related phenomena. And this probably is the most difficult section to read because it deals with the science of light and color and vision and illusion. The next section is on conservation, and I explain a number of the instruments in scientific laboratories that are used in art conservation. If you've ever had the opportunity to go through the art conservation labs at Buffalo State, they're wonderful. And it's like walking into a science research lab. When somebody brings a painting in to have it conserved, the painting or the sculpture or the work on paper literally undergoes a physical examination. They look at it, then they examine it. Sometimes they subject it to, it depends on the piece and what needs to be done. And one of my friends had a painting that she owned, and it got damaged when she brought it back to the United States after living in Europe. It had a gash in it, and she took it over to the labs and they conserved it. And I went through, my friend loaned me the conservation materials. And I sort of summarize them, but it's a step-by-step process of how they restored this particular painting. It had to have a lot of work. They weren't sure exactly how old it was, but they were able to establish the age by taking paint samples and saying, well, it probably is older because the pigments were older, but they had to analyze them. Anyway, I described that.
It also authenticity too. I mean, they can check to find out if work is authentic or not.
Yeah, yeah. And then I do some of the standard conservation, the ones that the Sistine ceiling and the altar over the altar, and then Leonardo's Last Supper in Milan, and the Elgin marbles and the Riachi bronzes, which are quite fascinating. They found the bronzes in the water, brought them up from the water, and there aren't many of these in existence, so they went out of their way to conserve these, because way back when the statues, the materials of the statues were frequently recycled, and there aren't many statues left. So when they found these, they said, hooray,
Yeah.
but they needed to fix them up. And then the last section, which I think probably most people can identify with, is the subject matter. I look at the subject matter of human body, which has been represented in art and has been studied by science, biodiversity, weather, geology. We do a lot with Niagara Falls, and then astronomy.
And Niagara Falls is definitely, the Birchfield has had many, many exhibits where there are many paintings, and the Albright too, so, and this is our heritage in Western New York. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. I know it's not always science. She's got a lot of connections with and bringing in the art pieces. There's a whole list. You have a whole list in the study group, if you get that, about all the artworks that are talked about. So it's not just science, science, science. It's connected to art. Let's see, there are a couple more. Let's see. So the book, let's see. You compare contemporary art and contemporary science.
Well, I define contemporary art and contemporary science. It's the art and science that's being produced now. And if you look back, way back to the time when Pasteur was doing his work, when Galileo was doing his work, their work was contemporary science when it was going on. It wasn't always immediately accepted. Darwin's work was contemporary. The work of Van Gogh, Picasso, and Pollock was contemporary work when it was first created. And Van Gogh only sold one painting during his life. If you and I owned a painting by Van Gogh right now, we'd be very happy because our tastes have significantly changed. The contemporary art that was so challenging when it was created became accepted. Sometimes people will walk into an art museum now, or they'll read something about science and they'll say, I don't get this, I don't understand this. But then eventually they get to the point where they understand it.
Yeah, art's gotten so out there. I mean, even UB has a biological art department, you know, Paul Vanus, and there's even a work downstairs in the hallway.
We had a whole exhibit.
We had a whole exhibit, yeah, and
Yeah.
there was an exhibit at the Albright too on his with the DNA.
So,
But there's one on, there's a painting after this, if you want to go downstairs, in the hallway between the Leroy and
the Button corridor.
yeah, in the corridor. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Shame on me. It's a T-shirt that was shown that the colors come out and he did a whole experiment on it. So it's, yeah,
You know what he was using on the shirt?
sweat, what?
Sweat.
Yeah,
Yes.
sweat. But it comes in different colors. Who was mentioning before we talked about something in colors were, that'll come to me later. It doesn't matter. So your book includes theatrical references and
Yes, there's one called Picasso at the Lapinagile. By, of all
Oh,
people,
that's wonderful.
Steve Martin.
Oh, yeah.
And it's been performed in Buffalo a couple of times.
And
I've
it's a
seen it
talk book.
several times.
and as you talk with too.
It's not particularly scientific or artistic, but it presents the idea, what if Picasso and Einstein could have sat down when they were at the beginning of their careers and had dialogue with each other. They never did, but what if?
Yeah.
And it was just an interesting.
And Steve
And
Martin
then,
collects birch fields.
Oh, does he? Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Pardon me?
Steve Martin collects birch fields.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
And
I know
then,
he's an art collector.
Some lyrics from The King and I, the song, It's a Puzzlement. I use that in the section on contemporary art. You know, what do you know? What do you believe? For instance, in the 1920s, up to that point, they thought the universe was just the Milky Way. And then they began to discover the universe was a lot larger. But we've been taught, if you've been a student in the 1920s, that this is the universe when you look up and you see the Milky Way. And now I don't think we really know how large the universe is. There was another one, Sunday in the Park with George, which refers to paintings by Seurat. And then the Bertolt Brecht plays on Galileo. And then another one by Yasmina Reza called Art. And essentially, it's a play about friendship and it's a play about paintings. And the particular painting in question was an all-white painting, one of these monochromatic works. And the person that bought the painting and the play really liked the all-white painting. Other people would go in and say, is that art?
Yeah.
And then those of you in the audience that know art know that monochromatic paintings are often not monochromatic. They're built in layers so that they get richness. Anyway, somebody picked that as a subject matter for one.
Well, it's also funny too, Ferris Bueller, that movie. I think that scene at the end where they go into the art museum and the young teenager is looking at the Sunday in the Park with George. I mean, that's so iconic. You see that all over the place. So that is connected. And what are some of the other works that you talk about? Some of the other examples?
Well, just, I'll read sort of a list. The St. Louis Gateway Arch, Stonehenge, Chichen Itza, the National Museum of Qatar. This is kind of interesting. When gypsum forms in a desert environment, the crystals have kind of a rose-like or petal-like appearance. And the formation is called a desert rose. And the architect decided, the architect that designed this museum decided he would pick up on this and incorporate it into the design of the museum. And the museum has all these unusual constructions, but it's based on that. And I've seen pictures and it almost looks like this museum rises up out of the desert. He's picking up on using a natural phenomenon, the crystal of the gypsum as it forms in the desert, and then transplanting it to architecture. The pyramids in Egypt, the ziggurat of Ur, Greek temples are in there, the Chartres Cathedral, the Eiffel Tower, the Sydney Opera House,
Even the Birchfield Penny,
the Birchfield Penny
which has
for
the
the
lead certificate. Yeah.
environmental safety phases. I don't know
And
if you've ever noticed when you
Yeah.
come in here that the lights sometimes dim in certain rooms. And in the bathrooms, the water comes on and goes off automatically. And this is all part of this to conserve energy and to conserve things. And Birchfield Penny was the first art museum in New York State to become LEED certified, Leadership in Energy Environmental Design, when it was built. And there's a medallion, I guess you'd call it, in the front entrance that indicates that Birchfield received this honor.
are there any other Western? Well, now we have
Well,
the
all right,
AKG too.
and
It's
then-
also, so she also brings in architecture. It's, yeah, everything is,
And the Guarantee Building downtown.
Oh,
with
yeah.
its terracotta tiles, and the Gray Cliff with its connection to the cliff that it's sitting on, which is a gray cliff of limestone, and the stones. If you look at the stones, you can see that some of them are native stones, and then some of them are stones that were pushed into this area when the glacier receded. The glacier pushed them down from northern Canada. The glacier melted and the stones were left behind. And when they started building some of the stone structures, and I believe it's the fireplace, some of these boulders, the glacial material was built into them. And if you know what stones look like, you can pick out which ones are which by looking at them.
so you began with the connection between Einstein and Picasso. So what is it?
Or are they connected?
Are they connected or, well, yeah, how? If,
First of all, Einstein and Picasso were what I like to call movers and shakers. Einstein obviously shook up the scientific world. He got them thinking about things in a whole different light. Picasso changed the way people thought about art. Both of them changed their respective subjects, and over time, they have changed the way we view science and art. And they were almost the very beginning. Time magazine honored Albert Einstein and called him the person of the century. And the Museum of Modern Art devoted their entire museum to Picasso's works because his work was so significant.
So a lot of artists do manifestos, and Mary has a little manifesto too. She's got 10 in the final, this is the final question. In conclusion, you propose 10 connections between science and art. For number 10, you write 10 is perhaps the most important connection of all. Every work of art is connected to science.
And,
Can you explain?
well, I could. But I'm not going to. So I want you to read my book. And before we close tonight, I want to do a hands-on with you. If you've got your cell phone, take it out,
Okay.
turn it on,
Oops.
and then,
Okay, turn it on and,
if you have Google Maps,
Mhm.
open that. If you don't have Google Maps, open your map program. And if you could get a satellite view, go for that.
I don't know how to do that.
you have to get it on the internet. if
I
you're-
think you're on it. That's a satellite view.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now, when we talked about places that were connected to science and art, I didn't mention this one because I was saving it to the very end. And if you've been at on the North Campus of the University of Buffalo, you know that there are a lot of solar panels.
Mhm.
When they first started putting solar panels in, they contacted Walter Hood, who was a landscape architect. And they asked him to come up with a plan for installing the solar panels. And so he came up with a plan. And the particular plan resembles a DNA profile.
Hmm.
Now, if you take your cell phones and type in this location, if you're lucky, I hope, you should be able to bring this up. You had a choice, either type in Maple and Flint, Flint roads, or UB Center for Tomorrow. And then look a little bit to the left and upper of that. And you should see a whole bunch of lines, 3 rows of lines. They will be the solar panels. If you drive past this, you can't see this, but you can see it from the.
Is that what you mean?
Center for
People. Whoops.
Oh, I think that's.
Does Service Center Road go right there? So if you type in Solar Strand.
Solar strand, maybe.
Solar
if you
Strand.
do that.
Solar Strand.
Just by itself?
Mhm. Well, you know, I would do Amherst, New York.
Have any of you had Eureka moment?
Yes.
I remember the first time I found that one. I was looking for a location.
There, Mary has it. There you go.
Very.
It's not park.
That you see.
The bike path.
This-
It's closed.
Now, The DNA profile that you're seeing is a pattern that if you were in a lab, now there are a whole bunch of ways that you can get DNA profiles, but this particular pattern, you extract DNA from something. Could be from human cells, it could be from sheep cells, it could be from bacteria, whatever. And then you take the DNA sample and you put it on a gel, an agar, and then you expose this to electricity for several hours. And over time, the DNA will separate into the bands. And then to see them, you have to put stain on top. There are a lot more steps that I just described, but you get that pattern.
We should go to questions.
I have a question for you, Mary, and this is a process question in a way. How did you take your concept and get it to a publisher and convince them that, how far along were you before you share it with the publisher? And how did you know to go to
I can see what I'm looking at.
the group you went to? Marty, right? Marty.
The book was pretty well finished when I talked to Marty. How did I find Marty? About 3 or 4 years ago, I signed up for a nonfiction book writing course at the History Museum on Saturday morning. And Marty is my editor, Marty Gorman,
Marty, go ahead.
and she was one of the presenters. And then I had a question about something, and I called the librarian at the History Museum, and she said, you should talk with Marty Gorman. So I called Marty Gorman, and she said, I should come in and talk to her. And that was around 2018, 2019. And then normally it takes about 1.5 years to get a book out. And we have had a few things happen in the last few years. Things slowed down.
Any other questions for Mary? Maybe online?
Well, I have a couple on chat. Let me see
Okay, you
if I
could
can
read
go-
those.
if I could figure this out.
They can unmute
In the
them.
meantime, if
Endeavors.
anyone wants to unmute themselves.
Yes.
I have a question. I don't have no. I
There you
can't. Can you hear me?
Is that
Yes.
Jane? Sounds like Jane Hanley.
It is.
Jane Hanley, how are you?
I'm good. And I am so proud of you, Mary.
Thank you.
Mary and I share much together. The fact that we graduated from Lockport High School the same year, that we both have been docents, and that we both love to travel. And one of my great experiences when I traveled is I went to see one of my foreign students' mothers, who my foreign student said to me, don't expect her to take you on any tourist things. She didn't. She took me to see the mud that Van Gogh used to create his paint. Would you like to explain that to me? Because when I looked at that mud, it was Van Gogh.
She said when she looked, they took her to see the mud
I
that
know,
he
I
used to
can't do
make.
it.
Oh, she can't do it,
I
right?
can't do it, Jane.
No?
No.
Not
Well,
tonight, maybe
honestly,
tomorrow.
There's a challenge.
I don't know how they created it, but it was the colors he used.
Huh.
And he got his paint, part of his paint from there. I didn't understand it. But Mary, that's the next chapter.
Her next book.
Chapter 11. Okay, I am so proud of you though.
Thank you.
It's nice.
Any other questions?
There was something that I can't.
There was a chat here.
Yeah.
There it is.
Can you read that?
I can see
I-
now.
I could probably ask if I'm
Wait a minute. I
Go
can
ahead,
see-
Maureen.
Yes, Maureen?
Yep,
in
go ahead.
Arizona. Hi,
Hi, Maureen.
Oh,
this is great. I'm curious, what year did you go to Buffalo State, Mary?
You had to ask.
Well, okay, I graduated in 74. I went 3.5 years.
Oh, you young thing.
Okay, okay,
I graduated in
wondered.
1956.
okay. Yeah, and
I still haven't read your.
oh, that's okay. I can explain if you want. I was an art education major. And I had to take a physics class and a math class just to get my science hours in and math hours. I ended up taking them both pass fail because the physics of light was so complicated. So I'm really in awe that you have put this book together and that you understand all those concepts and have applied them. I think that's fantastic. I can see how math applies to proportion, like the Da Vinci magic rectangle and the color temperature. I know I'd have to figure that out for photography processes, but I wondered if you have other practical applications for artists that scientific principles, an understanding of scientific principles would help us in our putting out there art that is not just pleasing to the eye, but it makes sense logically in the realm of science, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but
Well, I guess the best answer I can give you is that probably the most difficult chapter in the entire book is the one on light and color. Because when you get into that, it almost seems like some of it's very contradictory. The primary colors of light are red, green, and blue.
right.
Primary colors of paint are,
Yeah, red, yellow, blue. Red,
but
yellow,
it's
blue.
yellow. And when you talk about paint, you're talking about the material in paint that gives it its color, and that material is the pigment.
Yeah.
Which can be anything that gives color. But for something to have color, light has got to come down, strike it, either be absorbed or reflected. And that concept is awfully hard to get your head around.
Huh,
And it's hard for most people to get their head around. It was hard for me to figure that out too.
Hmm.
It's not an easy thing to understand.
good. Thank you for making me feel better.
Because sometimes it almost seems like you're double talking. When you say one thing about it and then it's something else.
Now, is your book available just at the Birchfield Penny? When I come back there to visit next summer, hopefully I can get it there, or do you have it for sale elsewhere or?
It's available online. It's
Oh, on
Amazon, right?
it's several sources, including my publisher, which is cityoflightpublishing.com.
Okay, thank you.
As in other places have it, so just search with the title or my name. It shows up.
For you, Al.
Any other questions? Because I have a final question for you. Molly Peacock, how do you know her?
Does she say she knows me?
I thought she was your student.
Actually, she was a performer in one of my freshman shows.
Okay. And
Where's
she's
the
our next
job?
author.
Pardon me?
She's coming back as our next,
Yeah.
our February author with her new book.
Yeah.
Can
I
I
hope
ask one
Paul
more
join us.
question?
Of course.
I don't want to hog this thing, but I'm intrigued by the thing they call right brain, left brain. And I was always in the humanities strain. And so was my daughter. And then she came back to go back to college, and she took all the sciences and maths. And she said, Mom, you will never understand me. So do you believe in the right brain, left brain? And if so, what do you think it says?
Well, when I was.
Because you are my example of a right brain, left brain.
um, When I was teaching, there were a number of other teachers that introduced the idea of right and left brain. And as a faculty member, we participated in different activities where we could determine if we were left-brained or right-brained. I took the testing and I came out left-brained. However, I know I'm right-brained too. Because when I walk into an art museum, I know I'm in an art museum. I'm surrounded by just something that's different. There's a magic. And one of the first places I went, once we opened up after the pandemic, was the Birchfield. To walk around and then to just sit in the atmosphere. And you don't get that in a science lab.
One of the things that we might take into consideration is you are a female, and females are better feeding information across the corpus callosum than our males.
I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know if it's true or not. Thanks. But there are plenty of women in the sciences.
Who are probably good at feeding information across the corpus callosum.
Could be.
Maybe the goal is to get both, to get it to work
Well,
together.
that's what
That's
you
what I
want to
think.
do.
That's what I think this book is really kind of helping do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait because I want to be a scientist, and I have never been one.
Well, I think one of the things that continues to surprise me is that the more you look, the more you literally are going to see. This past Sunday morning, I watched the CBS Sunday morning show, and on comes a show, a portion of the program that dealt with an exhibition in Philadelphia at the Barnes Museum, the Barnes Foundation Museum, of Amadeo Modigliani's work. And they're talking on and on about his work and so on. Next thing you know, they got a picture of an image of one of his paintings, but it was taken with a scientific instrument. So you can see not only the top layer, but the next layer, and then the wooden foundation and the picture behind it. And one of the things, apparently they, in this exhibition, was put together to show how they have studied Modigliani's work. And they found, with scientific instruments, that he frequently painted over other paintings. And if you have been hanging around the Birchfield or the Albright Knox, you know that other painters also painted over their paintings. And then with Modigliani, they had thought he was using a palette of like 5 colors, and they've now decided he's using a much larger palette. The point is they were looking at his works with scientific instruments. And I didn't expect to find it on Sunday morning.
And there it was.
And there it was.
So,
And
well,
don't forget the musical hand penicillin.
Yeah.
and thank you for that. And thank you for sharing your book with us tonight, Mary. Kate, thank you for doing a great job facilitating.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all for coming. And for Flower Diary by Molly Peacock, who knew Mary as a teacher. And I want to welcome Shara, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, sure.
Shara Thompson, who wrote a wonderful book with a partner that we it was, our book club was canceled. It was the first book canceled because of the pandemic, but we did it on Zoom. But Sarah will be back with us on April 2nd with her new book.
April 6th, I think.
6th.
6th, right.
It's a Thursday night regardless. It's the first Thursday of April. How about that? I'm sure of that date and dawned on the Danube. So welcome. Thank you for coming tonight. I really appreciate your being here, as I appreciate all of your being here, and especially you too. And thank you, Kelly. This is her first time figuring out the
Great job.
technical.
No.
And make sure you buy her book, because it sounds like it's going to be a wonderful read. So thank you all. Have a great night.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.